It's been over a week since Nathi Mthethwa was found dead outside his hotel room. Investigators say that this was a suicide case, but even they don't have the whole truth.
The investigation into his death.
New details have surfaced, and they are very shocking because not only do they give authorities answers that they didn't know, but it also proves that they might have been wrong about what they initially thought about this case. At the time of his death, most people who barely knew him would assume he was just South Africa's ambassador to France. But that was just a position he held as recently as 2023. Before then, he had served in the capacity of a police minister and the arts and culture minister. But his roots as a South African politician run way deeper. Before he was ever a minister, he was a top member of the African National Congress, the same party that brought democracy to South Africa, a party that Nelson Mandela was proudly the face of. He was part of the committee in charge of organizing the biggest sporting event South Africa had ever hosted, and he was one of the closest individuals to former President Jacob Zuma. And being a friend of someone as notorious as Zuma meant that he was never far from scandals. Except Mthethwa might have been the center of a few scandals himself. South African politics is a very harsh and unforgiving terrain, and it takes a certain degree of ruthlessness to survive, let alone make it far to the top. Being the police minister gave Mthethwa a lot of power that he didn't plan on using for just the nation's interest. In 2021, South African socialite Richard Medluli was facing charges of corruption, but Mthethwa, being in charge of police, made the Inspector General of Intelligence Fathi Radebe drop the investigation in Medluli. But his corrupt actions didn't stop at interfering and obstructing justice. Funds meant for the nation's police force were siphoned and used for personal interest. In the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, it was found that luxury vehicles were bought with police funds. And this was just one of many instances where funds were misappropriated under his leadership. But this dirt was not enough to smear his name, and allegations are not convictions. So Mthethwa only continued to climb the ladder of South African politics as he found himself appointed as the ambassador of South Africa to France. And it seemed as if his country had forgotten all the numerous accusations that were piled on his head. At the time of his passing, all of South Africa's top politicians were paying their respects and mourning the tragic loss of the diplomat. South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said that Mthethwa's passing was untimely and a moment of deep grief. The ANC national spokesperson, Mahalengi Bengu Motsiri, described him warmly as a freedom fighter who led a life of both struggle and service. But while other people were expressing how saddening this was, Carl Niehaus, a South African lawmaker, decided to skip all the pleasantries and call out the elephant in the room as he stated that the death of Nathi Mthethwa was not a natural death. It happened under what are evidently suspicious circumstances. Nathi Mthethwa was a very cheerful man. He never showed signs of being troubled mentally or in any capacity. But when investigators looked into his death initially, it looked like it was most likely a Mthethwa's body was discovered in the courtyard of the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Paris, France by the establishment's security staff on the morning of 30th September 2025. He had booked a room on the 22nd floor of the four-star hotel 10 days prior, on Friday the 19th of September 2025. Police found that the window's frame had been forced open by scissors, which were left at the scene. But choosing to fall as a way to take your life seems skeptical. Public prosecutor Laure Becquot in her initial investigation report found it strange because most people would try lethal medications before resorting to other dire means to end their life. But there were no signs of any medications in his hotel room, which ties into Niehaus' earlier comments about the ambassador's passing being suspicious and definitely not natural. The windows were designed to have safety features to prevent anyone from falling over the edge by accident. This means that even if Mthethwa was intoxicated, there was no way he could have fallen over the window ledge. Although official autopsy reports have remained confidential till now, there is a reason to believe that the diplomat might have had too much to drink the day before his body was discovered. He was slated to attend a cocktail event on Monday, the 29th of September. There is every reason to believe that on that fateful night, he could have had too much to drink, and he would have returned to his hotel room drunk and unaware of his actions. But here's the thing, he was not at the cocktail party. So this key fact alone completely rules out the possibility of his being an accident. In fact, it was his absence from the party that raised the alarm of his widow Felisiwe Buthelezi Mthethwa. When her husband failed to show up, she wasted no time in alarming the French police that her husband was missing. A high-ranking African diplomat going missing in one of Europe's most popular cities is very unheard of. The French police treated this like a missing persons case, but Félicie knew that her husband could be in a worse state than missing. He could possibly be and here's why she had a good reason to believe so. Prior to him going missing, she had gotten messages from her husband, but they weren't the normal type of messages where he would check in with his wife to tell her where he was or how he was doing. It was a message apologizing. At this point in time, Félicie has not revealed the state of things between them before his if their marriage was going through a turmoil or other family issues. But the most worrying thing about his message is that it didn't only contain texts of remorse, it also showed intentions of taking his life. With the timeline of events, this meant that those text messages were the last contact she had with her husband before learning of his This news was so daunting that she couldn't sleep for 3 whole days, while his widow had received messages that let her know that she should possibly expect the worst. On the other hand, Mthethwa's uncle Musa Wakupfila had no idea that his nephew had suicidal tendencies. What made it even more worse was that, while he was in Paris, they were frequently communicating, and he never for once gave any signs that he was mentally troubled. Rather, his words showed that he was as good as ever. So hearing of his passing not only broke his heart, but it just didn't make any sense. In an interview, he said, "Nathi loved his family. He used to call all of us just to check on how we were doing. He never said anything about problems at work or in his personal life. That's why we are shocked by his does not make sense. It left us with pain and confusion. How could his phone be found so far from his body? Was it suicide or something else? We need answers." But that's only the beginning of things. When Mthethwa's body was found, his phone wasn't on him or in his hotel room. It wasn't even within half a mile of where his body was found. It was 800 meters away. Why this is remains a mystery. The French police have not been able to find a reasonable explanation for this. But despite so many questions still left unanswered, investigators are still very confident that this was a case of suicide and nothing more. What also made police believe that this is what happened is because there was no evidence whatsoever for them to believe that someone else was with the South African ambassador by the time he supposedly jumped out the window. But with so many loose ends, Mthethwa's family are not satisfied with the report investigations have yielded. They want answers to every single detail that the French authorities are apparently leaving out. While his family are still worried about so many things, the body of Nathi Mthethwa has returned to South Africa with the late 58-year-old set to be honored with an official funeral on the 12th of October. Despite his remains going to rest, his family will not rest to find the truth about the death of their husband, brother, and father. If this was not a case of it was one of but if it was, who would possibly have a good reason to want Nathi Mthethwa? Given his history in the South African government, there are quite a few people who would have wanted him gone. Cyril Ramaphosa may have offered his condolences, but he was not a friend of Jacob Zuma. The story of South Africa's modern political drama is incomplete without the bitter, enduring rivalry between Cyril Ramaphosa and Jacob Zuma. These two men, both veterans of the ANC's struggle against apartheid, once stood side by side. Zuma, the former intelligence operative and charismatic populist, had the backing of the ANC's radical wing and vast grassroots support. Ramaphosa, the savvy trade unionist turned successful businessman, was seen by many as Nelson Mandela's preferred successor, a negotiator and a reformer. Their paths diverged in the mid-90s when Ramaphosa retreated from politics, disillusioned after Thabo Mbeki was chosen over him as deputy president. This moment set the stage for a decades-long push and pull for the soul of the African National Congress. Zuma ascended to the presidency in 2009, a victory for a pro-poor faction. But his tenure soon became synonymous with allegations of massive corruption and state capture, the systemic plundering of public resources by private interests. This crisis became Ramaphosa's opportunity. Returning to the political front line, he positioned himself as the anti-corruption crusader, running for the ANC presidency in 2017 on a platform of renewal and economic recovery. The battle was a proxy war. Ramaphosa represented reform and clean governance. Zuma, endorsing his ex-wife Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, represented the continuation of the status quo and the powerful faction that benefited from it. In the end, Ramaphosa came out on top, and this allowed everyone who was loyal to him, including Nathi Mthethwa, to engage in nefarious activities without facing the consequences of the law. So when Ramaphosa rose to presidency as South Africa's most powerful man, it left most politicians loyal to Zuma afraid of what would happen to them. But Nathi Mthethwa, being the wise man, managed to keep hold of power despite the change in authority. But with the amount of people who have it out for him given his past, makes it really difficult to believe that his demise was nothing more than a mere suicide. What if it's a message to South African politicians that no matter how much wealth and power they have attained, at the end of the day, they are still human, and they are far from invincible? It's barely been 2 weeks since his so a lot of questions still remain unanswered, but little by little the truth is coming to light, and sooner rather than later, the public will get the full picture and the whole story of what is really going on. Do you think Nathi Mthethwa really took his life, or is something more foul at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you never miss an update on this ongoing crime mystery.